So we're now about to go into our first panel, which is about building stronger economies and communities in Africa. But to kick us off, we're going to begin with a keynote address. I think things are really going downhill in this conference. We started first with an address by the chairman of Nestlé, Mr. Peter Brabeck, and then the Prime Minister of the Ivory Coast. And now we have an address from a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So I think things are trending down. Mr. Kofi Annan, of course, is a person who requires no introduction. He's the founding chair of the Kofi Annan Foundation. He was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2001 and served as the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations from 1997 to 2006. It was under his leadership that the Millennium Development Goals were actually adopted. Mr. Annan then set up the Kofi Annan Foundation in 2007 to mobilize political will and overcome threats to peace, development, and human rights. The foundation also supports Mr. Annan's preventative diplomacy and mediation activities, which have included, amongst other things, chairing the Commission on Elections, Democracy and Security, and launching the West Africa Commission on Drugs. Mr. Annan is the founding chair of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and chairs the Africa Progress Panel, both of which work for a food secure and prosperous Africa by promoting equitable and sustainable development. His memoirs, A Life in War and Peace, was published in 2012. So all of this is wonderful. But here comes the most exciting part. Mr. Annan, you and I have 3 things in common. The first is that we're both short men. Can you guess what the other 2 things are? Any guess?
Ghana.
Yes, Ghana. We both come from Ghana. Even though most people think I'm from South Africa, I'm from Ghana. And what is the third thing we have in common? Oh, he says my father's a friend of his. I didn't know that. Anything else?
No, you give me that.
The third thing that we have in common is that we both went to Macalester College in Minnesota, which is a very small... It's a very small college in Minnesota. And when people ask me, where did you go to school? I say, I went to Macalester College in Minnesota. Most people have no clue where that is. So I always have to say, it's where Kofi Annan went to school. So thank you for giving me, the opportunity to make my school famous. Please, Mr. Annan, your speech is over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You started by saying here is a man who doesn't need any introduction. That's dangerous way to introduce anybody. And you never know, when I stepped down as Secretary General, my wife Nan and I, who is here with us today, decided we were tired and we're going to take a bit of a break. We're going to take a bit of a break and borrowed a friend's house in Como in Italy. The house was adjacent to a forest, so we could go and walk in the forest without getting people in the village to know that we were there, because we really wanted to be incognito and rest. And we thought we can do it for 3 months. As I said, no television, no newspaper, no radio. And after a while, I was beginning to get bored. So I told Nan, let's go and see if we can get a newspaper. We walked into a tobacconist shop. And within seconds, a group of men in the corner were staring at us. And one of them broke away and made straight for us. She put out his hand and said, Morgan Freeman. May I have an autograph? So I said, sure. Signed K. Freeman, He was very happy. We were very happy and kept our silence. And my wife turned to me and said, and indeed, you are a free man. You are no longer the Secretary General. Dear friends, let me start by thanking Peter. Mr. Prime Minister, I haven't forgotten you, but I was trying to get straight into my message. So, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for welcoming all of us, distinguished ministers and dear friends. Let me start by thanking Peter Brabeck and Paul Buch for inviting me to join you today. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to exchange ideas on how private sector can spur inclusive growth in ways that address society's most pressing challenges. Over the past 15 years, as we've heard from the Prime Minister and Peter, Africa has been among the fastest growing regions in the world. And despite today's challenging economic environment, many African countries continue to grow, although at a slower pace. Côte d'Ivoire and Côte d'Ivoire's recent economic performance has been particularly impressive. It is expected to be amongst the fastest growing economies anywhere in the world. Africa's growth can no longer be explained just by global demand for its commodities. Most now comes from increased domestic demand for goods and services in thriving sectors such as telecoms, financial services, manufacturing, and agriculture. Businesses within and outside the continent are benefiting from Africa's young, entrepreneurial, and increasingly well-trained workforce. And today, inflows of private investment and remittances from the diaspora outstrip international aid. Democracy, too, is extending its roots on the continent, with countries such as Côte d'Ivoire taking steps to foster reconciliation and social cohesion. These efforts must continue, and I urge all citizens to join in this effort. End, reconcile, and let us bury for once and for all the nightmare of civil war and social divisions. Our continent is generally heading in the right direction, yet progress has been far from even. As we've heard, millions of people still live in abject poverty and hunger and are threatened by conflict, instability, and disease. Inequality is growing and widening the gap between the richest and the poorest. The lack of democratic, transparent, inclusive governance undermines citizens' rights and investor confidence. And environmental degradation and climate change, with its severe weather patterns, are driving many areas of Africa to the brink of catastrophe. Dear friends, last year, world leaders endorsed the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. These were crucial steps for the planet and its people, but we must remember that only promises which are kept are promises which count. The role of governments is vital in implementing those commitments, but it is not government's responsibility alone. It requires cooperation between every sector of society, and businesses must be at the heart of this endeavor. We must always remember that business cannot succeed in a society which fails, and I think Peter Brabeck reinforced that. Across the world, and here in Côte d'Ivoire, an increasing number of businesses are looking beyond short-term economic growth and creating value and sustainable solutions for society. They are driving innovation, creating jobs, and advancing more inclusive growth. They are building partnerships and embracing technologies to deliver wider goals of development, including improving access to food and clean water, to sanitation, healthcare, and education. Today, I will try to highlight 3 critical areas where joint action is urgently needed to build stronger economies and communities in Africa and beyond. First, I believe we must transform African agriculture and food systems. In sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 4 people are still chronically short of food, and millions more lack the right nutrition for proper health and development. Without action, climate change and demographic growth, or explosion if one wishes, means that these numbers will only get worse. Despite having unrivaled agricultural potential, which could transform Africa into a surplus exporter, Africa in fact spends about $35 billion a year importing food. One option for unlocking the potential is by treating African agriculture as a business and enabling the private sector to intervene and invest along with governments and the hard-working African farmers. This requires governments to put in place appropriate policies and regulations, strengthening institutions, and investing in infrastructure. And weather information must be available to all, particularly as we seek to promote weather index insurance for large and small farmers. Bigger corporations have to share market access, improved seed varieties, and advanced advanced farming techniques with smallholder farmers and local agribusinesses. The greatest success will come if all stakeholders work in close partnership. It is for this reason that last year my foundation launched the African Food Systems Initiative, which brings together leaders from all sectors in an effort to turn smallholders into agro-entrepreneurs and subsistence farms into profitable businesses. We must also ensure that agriculture and food systems are nutrition smart, because it is not just about the amount of food we grow, it is also about the type of food we consume. After all, we are what we eat. Nutrition is not just a health issue. It is crucial for economic growth, as better nourished populations are more productive. A second critical challenge, with a huge impact on health of African societies and economies, is environmental protection and good stewardship of scarce resources. A healthy environment is a prerequisite for eradicating poverty and driving equitable growth and social progress. Governments have to adopt, enforce, and strengthen policies that promote responsible natural resource management and prevent the loss of natural habitats, forests, and biodiversity. I urge businesses to source, process, and manage resources more sustainably to meet the growing demand while preserving our environment. This must include responsible water stewardship, striving for zero waste, and using energy resources more sustainably. We must also seize this moment to change the way we produce energy. Shifting towards renewable energy sources will not only help to avert climate catastrophe, but also create new opportunities for investment, growth, and employment. Third, we have to improve and protect social and economic opportunities for all Africans. According to the African Development Bank, Africa has become the world's second most unequal continent. The imbalance of wealth and income is not just morally repugnant, it is a serious impediment to future growth, and it sows the seeds of dissolution and conflict. Governments must tackle corruption, ensure that tax systems are free of loopholes, and promote transparency and accountability. There is unfortunately no shortage of countries in Africa which have enjoyed periods of significant growth, periods of significant economic growth and high investment, only to lose it to authoritarian rule that enriches the few and impoverishes the majority. I encourage business to engage the poor either as customers or as business partners. After all, by raising incomes and removing barriers which trap people in poverty, companies can build or expand their consumer base for their products and services. Business must also strictly comply with international standards of human rights across their operations and supply chain and adopt a zero-tolerance policy towards child. Thank you. I see you haven't forgotten what you were taught at McAllister. Thank you. Finally, I would urge all business leaders alike to invest in Africa's youth, women, and in harnessing their talent and creativity. A skilled and knowledgeable workforce is crucial for the long-term success of business and society as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, I recognize that this is an ambitious agenda. There are many challenges to overcome, but building stronger economies and communities in Africa is possible. Sustained and bold leadership from every sector is required. We have the expertise, the technologies, and the evidence needed to succeed. Let us all business, the public sector, civil society, live up to this responsibility. I have often said that a healthy, democratic, and prosperous societies are built on three pillars. First is peace and security. Second is inclusive development. And third is rule of law and respect for human rights. There can be no long-term peace without development. And there can be no long-term development without peace and stability. And no society or no nation can long prosper without respect for rule of law and human rights. So let us turn aspiration into action and build a peaceful and prosperous Africa founded on these three pillars of progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Annan. I'd now like to invite the panelists for us to begin our first discussion. Mr. Carlos Lopez, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. If you may please take your seats. Commissioner Asil, Commissioner for Trade and Industry of the African Union. Mr. Paul Bulker, CEO of Nestlé. And finally, Monsieur Duncan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you. ladies and gentlemen. So we're now going to have hopefully what will be an interesting discussion about creating shared value, and in particular about how we build stronger communities and economies in Africa. So we're going to begin first with Mr. Carlos Lopez, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Dr. Carlos Lopez, I mean. Dr. Lopez, one of the roles that the ECA plays is to capture statistics about trade, economic growth, and so on in Africa. So perhaps you could tell us what are the statistics showing about the amount of trade that occurs today between African countries, and how does that compare with what we might see, for example, in the European Union?
Thank you, Fred. Allow me to congratulate Kofi Annan for all that he represents. He has been a leader on the discussion about the issues of interest in this particular session. And I think, his passion for agriculture is pretty well known. He was my boss. Now I serve in his foundation's board. So I'm going to use a coffee metaphor. But it's not coffee the person, it's coffee the drink. We are discussing sustainable development goals, and many people don't realize the difference between what Kofi Annan has helped establish, the Millennium Development Goals, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The big difference is that now the international community, as we like to say, has adopted the 3 pillars for the definition of sustainable development, which is in the title of our session. And the 3 pillars are the economic, the social, and the environmental. What is relatively new, and is also new for Nestlé, and we'll come to that later, is the environmental pillar. So in fact, it is a bit difficult for most nations and also entities, institutions, to merge the 3 pillars with equal value, as it is proposed in the new concept. Normally, what they do is a bit like the cappuccino. So you have the coffee, which is the strong part, that's the economy. Then you had some milk, that's your social, so to make it a bit more tasty. And then, eventually, you put some cocoa, from Côte d'Ivoire, of course, or some chocolate on top, and then, you have your cappuccino. The problem is that when there are difficulties, like, for instance, now in Europe, other parts of the world, the first thing we get rid of is the cocoa or the chocolate. And then, we live with the latte because, we can't take care of everything. And then if the problems deepen, we think that we have first to fix the economy. So we get rid of the milk. And then we go back to the espresso. Now, of course, I'm using this because it's all about food, and it's all about what Nestlé does. And I think it is very important for us to realize that we are not going to get away with this cappuccino approach. We really have to understand that what needs to be transformed is the economy. The economy needs to be humanized. The economy needs to be greener, has to propose a different pathway that is very different from the paradigms that we are used to. So how are we going to do that? Well, one of the lessons from Nestlé, and I think it's very important for us to mention, is the long term. You have to invest on the long run. It was mentioned, Nestlé has been in Africa for 100 years. In fact, that means Nestlé saw the potential of the continent 100 years ago and started investing on that potential when nobody really cared much about it from that perspective. Because it was not the traditional extractive industries colonial model. This was about a different approach of creating many businesses, density, granular type of interventions. And I think this is what we need still today. Nestlé was created because they needed to move into an industrial approach to agriculture. We are still investing about $10 billion of aid every year on agriculture. what has been the progress in the last 30 years? It has been negligible. The yields per hectare have not gone up, and we have basically still hold the place of being the lowest in productivity around the world. How are we going to transform that? We need to transform that with industrialization of many parts of the value chain. This is very much the project that the National Development Plan of Côte d'Ivoire is promoting, with cocoa, where they are the #1 producer in the world, moving into 50% in terms of value addition. Right now it's about 20-something percent. So how are we going to be able to do that? And a lot of people are skeptical about Africa's prospects on industrializing. And they are right, because we are facing the biggest and most complex trade regimes ever in terms of complexity. We have difficulties with intellectual property. We have not mastered the marketing and other dimensions of the value chain that are extremely important today more than ever before. We are latecomers. We don't have infrastructure. We have skills problems, skills matching problems. So how are we going to overcome all of that? By basically investing on our good assets. And you said, Fred, one of them is regional integration. Right now we have 16% of intra-Africa trade. You know, I know that Fatima will talk about it. This is really appalling, because it's the lowest intra-regional trade in the world. In order for us to move into much more integrated trade, and Côte d'Ivoire is a very good example of going in that direction, we need to be much more cognizant of the importance of our own market. Right now, we import 83% of the processed food we consume. This is $35 billion a year that is spent. And it is ripe for us to invest in agro-business. It is a unique opportunity that we are not taking advantage of. Second asset that we have is that we are the first region in the world that can industrialize, going straight into much lower carbon intensive energy production. What I mean is that we have the chance that nobody else had before of having the costs of renewable energies at the same level as the costs of producing fossil fuels. So we can transit directly to the green industrialization. Another aspect that we have is our labor force that has been mentioned by the Prime Minister. The fact that we have this double dividend, not only demographic but also urban dividend, that will allow for us to take advantage of a completely different set of skills, but also the larger labor force by 2035, larger than China and India. And I can go on with some of the assets, but the point is, if we don't build on these assets and address some of the issues that have been mentioned, like, for instance, the issue of inclusiveness, the issue of respect for the environment, and us catapulting and leapfrogging some of the difficulties that others have faced, we are not going to make it. So I hope this gives you a good sense of where we are in terms of the potential for industrialization and the importance it has for the transformation of our agriculture.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Commissioner Asil, we heard from Dr. Lopez that Africa does less than 16% of our trade within the continent. And I think this compares to about 70 or 80% that you might see in the European Union and North America. And you also mentioned what some members of the private sector like Nestlé can do. What, in your opinion, are the three most critical actions that governments can take to radically improve the situation of inter-regional trade over the next few decades?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, statistic actually staying around 16%, but I think that it's very important that we also capture the informal economies. I think the informal economies are not captured. And I know Dr. Lopez with our economic departments are really trying to see how we can upgrade our statistics so that we can capture it right. But also government have that need to do the enabling, give the enabling environment that's for that, trade to be captured, especially that 85% of the traders are women across borders. So it's very important that we capture that informal economy to capture to a formal economy. Now, what do we need to do? The 3 points that the government needs to focus on. First of all, elimination of, the non-trade barriers and also, the trade barriers. It's very important that we talk about them. One of them is actually movement of business people. I mean, you look at the ECOWAS region today, actually they have free movement of people, they have actually, a common identity and so forth. I think that the other economic communities need to do more, especially on the movement of people, is very important. Everything that we speak about, whether we speak about high-speed train, whether we speak about the value chain, productivity, it's no point when, somebody, a high-speed train, for example, can come to a border and stop for, 2 hours or 2 days to look for visa, to make sure that clearance of goods are taken and so forth. So it's very important that we really discuss the movement of people, the movement of goods, because of course goods do not move themselves. So it's very important that we address the issue of business, people. The other issues are, all the standard, the SPS measures. I think they're very important. We need really to address the standards. Even we benefit from a market. For example, if you take the issue of the American market today, for example, AGOA, we really cannot meet the standard required, for example, to ship. So it's very important that we harmonize our own standard in Africa, recognize what is acceptable and so forth, so that we can trade among ourselves, facilitate, trade facilitation is the key. So that's one of the aspects. The other aspect is really, when you talk about trading, it's very important that we talk about what it takes. What is the prerequisites of trading? We must produce in order for us to trade. And, in order for us to produce, we really, and trade among ourselves, we need to understand that we're always saying that we're producing the same good, and therefore we cannot trade among ourselves. So it's very important that we really address this issue, innovation, value addition, the issue of, value chain, for example, or the concept made in Africa. So a country A can trade to a certain point, to go to country B, we take it to the next level. So I think it's very important that we really look at it on a more holistical way, on a more regional way. The whole world is talking about global value chain, so at least it's important that we really look at the issue of regional value chain so that we can move forward. Now, the last aspect is competitiveness. We all know that, even when we produce, the cost of production is very high, and therefore we cannot compete with the rest of the world. So it's very important that the government can address all the issues that really are hindering, low production cost. For example, the issue of infrastructure is very important. How do we ensure that even though we have, big human capital in here, and technically, or theoretically, labor is supposed to be cheap, but, the infrastructure, all the energies, all of these things, the trade facilitation measure, we really must address them correctly in order for us to be competitive on the market and also produce in Africa. So these are some of the elements that we really need to address in order for us to move forward, but we also need to make sure that our statistics capture the informal trade so that we know exactly where do we stand on our statistic on boosting intra-African trade.
Thank you. So, Dr. Lopez, you have some work to do to improve your statistics.
Countries do. We help.
Great. So, Commissioner Asil, I heard from you that number one, we need to eliminate trade and non-trade barriers. We need to make sure that our standards are actually facilitate trade rather than prevent it. And also, we have to actually produce more and be more innovative and add value, and then finally to enhance our competitiveness. And all of that will promote inter-regional trade. Now, to you again, Commissioner Asil, Africa is projected to have the largest workforce in the world by 2040. We'll be larger than China and larger than India, our workforce. And 1 billion people will need employment each year. How can we turn businesses into global engines of employment to actually absorb this massive workforce that Africa is going to have? Thank
you very much for the question. Again, I think let me just talk a little bit about Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 is an agenda, it's a vision, it's the Africa that we want, the Africa that the population wants. So there is a lot of massive consultation with all parts of the society to come with the Agenda 2063, which is the Africa we want. And of course, you can imagine that unemployment is really at the head, at the heart of Agenda 2063, really making sure how do we create employment, sustainable development, sustainable, development in this continent. So on the first 10 years, of course, employment become very, very high. And of course, that Agenda 2063 has been decided in 2013. So we're using the 2013 as a baseline to see, by 2023, which is 10 years exactly from 2013 to 2023, we want unemployment rate, to actually the employment rate to increase by 30%. Youth and women to increase annually by 2%. So we figure out the percentages, and then of course we put that mechanism to monitor that on every 2 years to see how are we progressing. Now, this target, how do we achieve them? Of course, the most, and my boss said, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, the most important resources that we have in this continent is our human resources. So education, education, education. Higher education, vocational training, and also education with an emphasis on STEM, science, technology, innovation, mathematics. And always, my boss said, when you skill the people, when you give them the right skill, they will figure out what to do with this continent. So it's very, very important. And now we're working with the Africa Capacity Building Foundation to ensure that we map what exists in Africa, what type of skills required in Africa to transform this continent, and then we can, move forward and make sure that, we have that skill revolution that our, countries, our economies require in order for us to move forward. The second thing is, of course, today we are really proactive, reactive to the commodity prices. So it's very important that we really have a commodity strategy to understand and how can we be proactive, to all this, fluctuation of prices, how our economies can be more resilient. And it's very important to diversify our economies. And again, really, when you talk about diversification, agriculture come to factor. We really must invest in agriculture. We must modernize our agriculture. We have launched this campaign, Taking the Hoe to the Museum, I think by Head of State and Government in June of 2015. But we also need to think, what are the replacements for the hoe? We're not going to actually import, hopefully, that, machinery from outside the world, but at least, at the regional basis, putting some hub, at least assemble to start with, assemble some tillers, some machineries to replace the hoe. Making agriculture cool for really the youth is very important. Today when we talk about modernization, we talk about cell phone and so forth, I think that we really need to educate our youth to agriculture so that, they don't again go, to Europe, Mediterranean, crossing the seas and dying and so forth. They're really looking for employment. So I think that this is very important here. It's also important that we create and support, young entrepreneurs, encourage them to really create businesses in Africa. And that's why I think that, different set of training are very, very required to move forward. So these are some of the aspects. For us, it's a matter of priority. It's a matter of today. It's not about 2040. And therefore, it's very important that, we attract, investment into that continent. We're working on the Continental Free Trade Area by 2017. And this is something that Head of State and Government will discuss at the next summit to ensure how do we move forward, how do we eliminate barrier, how do we make sure that, the issue of value chain is materialized. How do we make sure that any company from any part of the world can be anywhere in Africa, produce in Africa, the demand is in Africa, and creating employment in this Africa. So we need to really attract, investment in the Africa in order for us to create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. So we need to invest in our skills. We need to become more resistant to the commodity cycle. And the key thing that you mentioned is how do we invest more in agriculture so that we can actually create jobs for the huge proportion of our society that depends on agriculture, and how do we stimulate entrepreneurship so that we can create our own jobs and not wait for others to give us those jobs. Now, turning to you, Mr. Bulka, the CEO of Nestlé. You run a corporation with 300,000 employees and annual revenues of about $100 billion US. Now, that's more than the GDP of most African countries. So one could say that, if you really want to make a difference in Africa, why don't you just donate some of these revenues to Africans? But you're clearly not doing that. So what, in your opinion, is this whole creating shared value? Why is that the right approach to doing business in Africa?
Well, we don't donate because we can only do it once, and then it's gone. And I think we want to be part of this continent for the next 100 years, and that's why. I think actually, by your question, you touched the specifics of creating shared value. This doesn't work.
Can we get a microphone, please? We'll try this one.
Is it working now? It's working now. Actually, by that question you asked, you allow me to talk about creating shared value, and so many things that has been said that I want to pick up, and I'm going to pick Puccini, where you say you have actually layers that are not linked with each other, and creating shared value is actually reversed. It is showing that everything is linked. If you create an environment that you have referred to and framing that allows the...
Sorry, it's not working. Try this one.
If you allow a framing that allows the private sector or the initiative or the creativity to flourish, you actually create an environment that allows creating shared value to work well, in the sense that, look, we have been 100 years in this continent. Coincidence, 150 years of existence of the company. It is 150 years of a passion for nutrition, passion for quality, but also a passion to be part of society. And I think that is what creating shared value is all about. It is Nestlé here in Africa. What have we done? We just have been ourselves, a company that links up with society, that goes and wants to be successful, that creates shareholder value over time, but that also links up with the communities it lives in. We are living and existing and having success because we serve consumers in Africa through nutrition. And nutrition really adapted to the specific nutritional needs of the continent. Hence, there is response over time. Here we need to micro-fortify. We know the big four, iron, vitamin A, etc. We do that. We can use our products to do that. We have factories over the continent, so we produce locally. Why we use also local ingredients, like we do here in Ivory Coast and with cocoa, coffee, but also we use ingredients and adapt our products towards local ingredients. Cassava is one of them, where we have thousands of small farmers, in majority linking up with a stable demand, so that we can calculate the next time over years to have a livelihood. We have an R&D center here, how we translate the local ingredients into our products. So that is what actually creating shared value is all about. It's not a layer, more or less. It is not something that when you have good times, you can think about sustainability. You just build it into your reason of being. And I think that is the nicety about creating shared value. It is something that is intrinsic to the permanent drive of companies and society at large to do and to be creative, to push for societies to develop in a creative way and have business models that are sustainable over time and that create value for society at the same time. I think that is what we are. And that's why I don't think a company like ours should all of a sudden write a big check, the last check, with a lot of applause, maybe, and sympathy for one day, and it's gone. I'd rather build a company, and we are 340,000 people all over the world that are part of societies driving, creating shared value. And you see, one is not exclusive of another. Economical activity per se has always been, when it is framed in the longer term with the right set of values, but you have to have perspective of time. When you go about your economical activity in that sense, you will, in everything you do, create value for society at large. For Nestlé, we said, where do we intersect with society very intensively? And that is definitely nutrition. That is what we're all about, food and beverage with nutritional answers to nutritional needs. But water, raw material is agriculture, agriculture is water. Water is the most precious resource in the world. Rural development, why? Because again, we have 460 factories linked with rural areas, more than 3/4 of them, linking up with hundreds of thousands of farmers directly and work with them so that they can have stable incomes and we can have quality ingredients. So again, you have this win-win. And I think that's a compelling meaning of creating shared value. It is actually going about, it's the fundamental way we go about, call it social responsibility, but also economical responsibility, responsibility versus future generations. So it goes beyond. And that is why we also internally, 340,000 people are so motivated online, because we can also internally explain how we are part of society as a company, and our people are proud of that.
So you donate once and that's it, but you want to actually be here for long term and keep, driving value for society, building it central to your business. Now, you've been here for 100 years in Africa, and you continue to invest in Africa. So we want more companies, more global multinationals like Nestlé to come and invest and stay in Africa for 100 years. What should African governments do to attract more investment from global multinationals like Nestlé?
Well, we have been indeed 100 years here in Africa, and it has not only been a flat and easy going, and we know that, and that is not only Africa, that's how the world is. But so we are in for the long term, good and bad times, but we enjoy more the good times. And so what governments can do, and what actually their role is to frame a society and also through legislation, through conditioning, through macroeconomical setups, and to frame it in such a way that actually private initiative, with that inspiration that I just mentioned, can flourish. That markets are open, and the most efficient way of organizing a continent is opening the markets internal as a continent, and so that products can flow, because then products are produced where they're best produced, but they flow. So it is actually, I always make the difference, that parallel. Governments are there, and their role is to frame a reality that allows people, the private sector, then to make the painting. So governments, the framing, private and society, the painting. The problem starts when government wants to do the painting too. We can discuss that. I don't think they are the most efficient way of doing it, but that framing. The most important thing, though, is consistency over time. You see, when you invest in a factory, that is not an investment or a commitment for a few years. You invest for the long haul, for the long term. You connect with consumers and formulate and invent products and services and link up with consumers over the long term. And that can only flourish when you have the rules of the game framed in the right way, but also consistent over time. And I think the most damage is done when you don't have consistency over time. And then also harmony between countries in the sense of a continent, all countries in Africa, aiming and going in the same direction. And having open markets is another way of stabilizing that. I think that is what we would expect from governments, and I think that is what governments want to do. So there's commitments to be made. Governments have commitments towards society. We have commitments towards countries in a certain framing. I can only say we are committed to Africa.
So framing the picture, not actually painting the picture, and consistency of policy so that you can plan for the long haul and so that you can actually stay here for the 100 years. And then also regional integration, because individually our economies are too small, but if suddenly you aggregate the region, then you have a much larger market to invest in.
Yeah.
Thank you. Last question to you, Mr. Wilkie. You make chocolate. Now, to make that chocolate, you need cocoa from Ivory Coast and from neighboring countries like Ghana, etc. Yet Africa today captures about 16% of the value that comes from cocoa. What are you doing as Nestlé to ensure that more value is captured here in Africa?
Well, first of all, it's not only a fraction of that value, it's also being there to make sure that there's more value made per se. So that's why we have the Nestlé Cocoa Plan, so that we work with the cocoa farmers so that they have better quality, higher income, and more better yields, and do that also over the long term, and more environmental practices to do that societal too, so that you have also the societies where that happens, having that done as it should be with all the human rights and all these conditions. That's the first thing. The second thing is also then see how we use and indeed added value factories or dimensions here in the continent. That is done in the continent, not in every country, but we work then also with people who are specialized in transforming that. So when asking them to produce as much as possible of the cocoa and the cocoa added value products as close as possible where the production is. Where we have, for example, coffee, not only cocoa, but coffee here too, that we work with the Ivory Coast. We actually transform coffee straight away into Nescafé here, in the sense that we work directly to the added value finished products. And therefore we need internal markets, and that's where also that integration is so important. You can hardly then justify factories for all products and all markets, integration, but then each market, each country will then play on their strengths. In coffee, for example, we have been working to increase the coffee production here in the Ivory Coast, and we actually take up something like 30–40% of the coffee production here locally. So that's why we have 26 factories. We have been opening factories. So we have invested 1 billion Swiss francs over the last 5 years in production capacity. The more we can have internal markets that justify local production for local consumers, the more stable it is. And I think that is the most important thing. Have an environmental frame that we can have local markets that justify added end products, factories, and I think that is a little bit the process we're in.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, unfortunately my French is not very good, so allow me to speak in English, please. The rest of Africa is suffering right now relative to the past. The economies have slowed down since the last few years, yet Ivory Coast is booming. Last year you grew by about 8.4%, and this year the forecasts are showing growth again above 8%. Part of this, I understand, is coming from significant foreign investment that you're attracting. What is Ivory Coast doing right to attract all of this foreign investment?
But unfortunately for you, I will speak in French. But we can have some discussion at the end of the forum in English. Well, ce que je voulais dire.
What I wanted to say, first of all, I would like to thank those discussants who spoke before me, and say that in Côte d'Ivoire, we believe that the private sector, national and international, must be the engine of growth. This is not words, these are facts. In 2012, 2015, the investment program over that period was $22 billion. When we went to the advisory group, we had 100% of investors being from the private sector, national and international. In the new program that we negotiated in Paris on the 17th and 18th of May for 2016 to 2020 is $100 billion. We are saying that 62.5% of that money will come from the private sector, national, international, private sector. So in Côte d'Ivoire, according to the vision of the President of the Republic, the private sector must be the engine of growth. But you're asking me, how do you do this what do you do to attract investment? It's not complicated. You need a win-win partnership. The private sector will come if it has interest here. Secondly, you need to undertake reforms, important reforms, and put in place regulatory environment that is important by making reforms, as I said, for reforms in the context of doing business, in the context of the American MCC, and in the ETI framework. And we also make our own reforms depending on the needs that we feel for the private sector. The Ministry of Finance is having monthly discussions with the private sector. Every 3 months, the Prime Minister is having discussions with the private sector in order to see where the difficulties are and make the appropriate changes. We have BOTs and PPPs because these help the private sector better express its needs. And if we can do this, things will change. But I think that the CEO of Nestlé indicated that it depends on the market. The Ivorian market is not very important. But if you offer the YMO market, the countries that are using the CFA franc, for instance, then you will have a larger market. And if you go to the ECOWAS market, it's even better. And then if you have the whole African market, it's even more important. And I'm going to go back to what has been said and indicate about the 16% of interregional trade. I was saying that we have 27% of trade with ECOWAS countries and 34% with the rest of Africa. And our objective is to go all the way up to 50%. And we want to improve the contacts that we have on the ground. Nigeria, for instance, is the first supplier of Côte d'Ivoire. Burkina Faso is the 10th global client of Côte d'Ivoire. So we work in this way. If we make the appropriate reforms, if we create the conditions that are needed, things will improve. And I would like to say there is the international private sector that, and we have to develop the national private sector as well. The private sector will not go somewhere unless it knows that the private sector nationally is doing well. If it feels that people are being treated properly in their own country, the international private sector will come. And if this is done, you will see that things will improve very quickly. A decade is more than enough to develop this.
That's
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a very, very clear articulation of a vision. You can see, framing the way in which you're doing from. And from what I got from that, you're saying that the private sector, you're really seeing that as the engine of economic growth, and you're creating space for them to come into the market through win-win partnerships. You're also, facilitating some good reforms.
Correct.
That are enabling, ease of doing business. And it seems like also you're engaging in a very good dialogue with the private sector to really understand their needs, to make sure that you're creating an environment, not just for, global multinationals, but also local and national, industry champions. So now I can see why the economy is growing so fast.
Well, I have also to add that, as I mentioned at the end, that we have to give some fiscal reforms if you want to attract them.
Yes.
Because the rate of taxation is also important. And I do think that we can give more of them to diminish the rate of investment, but to increase the basis. And I think if you do that, we can have more investment. And I think the state, the government will earn more, even if the rates are decreasing, because the base of taxation is larger, of course.
Bigger, yes.
Okay, so we are working hard on it.
And that's what, I live in Mauritius now, and that's what they did. And they reduced the tax rate, and they saw that they actually increased the amount of taxes collected. Okay. Now, you heard from, poll here that about what governments can do to attract more investments from global multinationals like like Nestlé. In your opinion, what should multinationals do once you let them in to become more effective citizens of your local economy?
What did the international do for what?
What, in your opinion, should multinationals do when you have let them into your country to be more effective citizens of your local economy?
Ce que je voulais dire, c'est qu'effectivement, c'est un élément important, je crois.
Is very important. It's the case with Nestlé. We have discussions with them so that they know the needs of the government and the needs of the people, so that the international companies that come in take into account the needs not only of the government but also of the people. And of course, for the government, they have to contribute to the fiscal resources of the government, but what is important is the needs of the people. And as I was saying in my speech, this is the improvement in terms of research that is done by the group in the area of cocoa, coffee, and foodstuff to increase the yield. And in that way, the peasants make more money. And the salaries here are above average. And so these are important. And we also want multinationals to comply with the regulations that have been put in place by governments. And so, and they can also have internal competition so that the companies that are here in the area of cocoa, for instance, Cargill, Olam, etc., can compete locally speaking. And we have to make sure that people do not come to an agreement between companies to benefit themselves and not the country. I think that every time there is an issue, the government has to have discussions with the private sector, and the private sector must be open to listen to the government, and we are open to finding solutions whenever there are issues to be dealt with. And if we work hand in hand, there will not be any battle between the government and the private sector. There must be a complicity between the two. A certain understanding between the national, international, private sector and the government. And the growth that we have obtained in Côte d'Ivoire is the result of this cooperation between the government and the private sector. And this year, we're going to get even more growth. Thank you.
They're saying investing in research and developing the human capacity on the ground, complying with the regulations that you have set, and also it seems like the spirit of dialogue that you're engaging with your local private sector, you're also saying with multinationals who are out there. Okay, we're about to go soon to questions from the audience and also from social media. But before we do that, Mr. Brabeck gave me the permission to be innovative. So I'm going to do something that happens at the university that I run in Mauritius. We have every few weeks we have different guests who come to the university, and one of our students does something called a rapid fire interview with this person. And you get asked. I'm going to ask you a few questions, Mr. Prime Minister, and you have less than 10 words to respond.
Okay, I will try.
And this is what the young people do at our university.
Okay.
First question. What do you absolutely dislike?
Well, I dislike when there's no contribution to the development.
Excellent. Less than 10 words. Good.
10
Acheke
seconds.
or Aloko?
You see?
Acheke or Aloko? Acheke or Aloko?
Both of them. I don't want some problem because Both are coming from the south of Côte d'Ivoire, but there is something else. Fonio in the north also.
Okay. What is your biggest life lesson?
Life?
What is your biggest lesson in life, your biggest life lesson?
Well, to have hope in the future.
Ivory Coast in 2030.
An emerging country.
Middle-income country. Excellent. What are you most looking forward to from today's conference?
What I'm looking for?
What are you most looking forward to from today's conference?
Well, I do think that at the end of the conference, Nestlé will decide to process 50% of cocoa here in Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you. Okay. We have a question on social media from someone called which is from John Elkington in Volans in the UK. And the question is directed to Commissioner Asil, who says, how do you make agriculture cool? Either change what cool means or uphold another ideal.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think it's important to advertise agriculture. It's important to make it technologically sounded. It's important to connect technologies such as, cell phone and so forth, so that you don't really, and modernize agriculture, so that you don't see, the traditional hoe, somebody with different type of clothes. So that's what I call by, being cool for the youth to be engaged in agriculture, to see that it's a business like any other business. You can wear a suit, you can do certain things, and you can mechanize agriculture, and then you can create employment. So that's what I call by, making it cool for youth.
Great, thank you. Can we have the microphones going out, please, because we're about to have questions soon. So I'll take a couple of questions from the audience. There are some questions.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Leon Sano. I'm lecturing in a business school that's called MD Business School. My question is just here. I'm just curious because I'm working with lots of entrepreneurs and I'm lecturing the business school of executive education. And I'm really curious to know what is Nestlé going to do when these local, smart and bustling entrepreneurs that are around the country are going to manufacture and sell great products. So how are they going to source the commodities that they're using? Because let's say in about 10 or 15 years from now, local entrepreneurs have their own industry. So what are you going to do in this case? Thank you.
Thank you. So that question is directed to Paul.
If I understand well, you say, what are you going to do as a company if others, smart entrepreneurs, local, are going to take over our activity? Or I didn't understand the question, because basically what we do as a company is do what we're good at, which is transforming agricultural materials and others, and build value and services and products, nutritional products, but we do that not alone. So we linked up with an amazing amount of local entrepreneurs here. And the most direct entrepreneurs are the agriculture entrepreneurs that we are actually making and trying to give them a cool activity. But I don't...
There's no infinite amount of commodities. I mean, there's a certain amount of commodities, and there are multinational operating like Nestlé and other companies using these commodities. And you're going to have local entrepreneurs. I mean, I have here some entrepreneurs working with cocoa and building their own capacity, their own industries. Okay, so at some point in time, you're going to have different people fighting to get the commodities.
All right.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying.
All right, limited resources and the fight for it. Actually, isn't there a better example of creating shared value? And if we speak about, for example, cocoa or coffee, we have the Nescafé plan, we have the Cocoa Plan. And what we're looking for there is to have enough ingredient security with the right quality. And how do we do that? Well, we can select and use our R&D capabilities and select the plantlets that are yielding more, higher quality, less environmental impact. We distribute that by the millions of plantlets. We don't link them up with our supply chain. We just share them with the communities. And through that, we secure enough resources for our activities, and yet at the same time, they are shared with others. I don't believe, basically your question goes about, is there enough security, agricultural security, raw material security for the future, if we're going to have to feed the 9-10 billion that are coming up and all. And again, there I believe a company like ours, together with others, together with governments, together with the communities that we are working with, we're looking into ways of having indeed an answer to that. I'm a true believer that agriculture per se, with minimum efforts at the end of the day, again, consistency over time, but sharing best practice, sharing what we can share, and scale that up. I don't think we're going to be squeezing, as you may fear, smaller entrepreneurs for. Actually, we're going to integrate them more into the whole process. Create a shared value again, in my eyes. We are working now, for example, here. Small entrepreneurs, we have my own job initiative that we link up in distribution or in sampling of our products. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people that didn't have a livelihood or an income, nor stable income, will link them up with our activity. They're not building up a factory, but they're linked up with our brands and distributing them and building their own companies, small and medium and bigger ones. So it's not a matter of size and overpowering the small and all, because we know also overpowering the small, they are our consumers at the end of the day. It's being part of a society and looking for ways of having sustainable development.
Thank you, Paul. Another question? You have a question over there?
Thank you. My name is Nenna from the World Wide Web Foundation. I would like to take off from Commissioner Akil to say that was a very cool answer in bringing technology to the heart of agriculture. I also like the cappuccino analogy. It was very sweet. But I wanted to bring in something else that is cross-cutting across economy, social, and environmental. And that is the use and importance of information and communication technologies, specifically access to the internet. I live in this country, and I know that this government has taken a step forward in the defiscalization of technology equipment. But then the policy towards broader access to the internet is still not fully there. I'm fully aware that this is not a Côte d'Ivoire conference, but this is a sustainable development conference. And my question to our eminent panelists, in the framework of our Africa that we want, what role do we want to put into access to the internet, as this is cross-cutting and I believe critical to sustainable development? Please forgive me, I'm from the Web Foundation. I am one of the mentors of the internet community in Côte d'Ivoire, and I won't be forgiven if I don't put this on our table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps, Dr. Lopez, you can take that question, and then also Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, right now, 335 million Africans have access to internet, 77 million in Nigeria alone. By 2020, it will reach 600 million, and it's going to be really a landmark year, because according to projections by Cisco, we'll have 1.5 devices per person in Africa. So this is going to be really a multiplying, very fast growth that is going to change completely the landscape over the next few years. So we have to prepare for that type of revolution. Some characteristics of that revolution are already present, like the mobile banking, where Africa is the leader in the world, with about 50% of mobile transactions, banking mobile transactions, being done in Africa, 50% the rest of the world, with some of the technology for mobile banking being developed right now, mostly in countries like Kenya. And also, Commissioner Asil was mentioning use of ICT in agriculture and other types of activities that are really demonstrating the leapfrogging frugal innovation capacity in the continent, like, for instance, on insurance, health sector, and so on. So I think it's no longer a preoccupation, but rather how we use this potential, because it's going to grow very fast. In fact, one of the discoveries over the last years for us economists has been through national accounts updating, the so-called rebasing exercises, to discover that when countries update their national accounts, some of the value that was not captured before is actually in the ICT sector, and it's quite colossal. And we need to do more of that exercise. Right now, Africa has only about 14 countries with up-to-date national accounts, if you take into account the methodological requirement for a 5-year time lag maximum for the base year that is used. And we have about the majority of African countries that are not doing so. So this is to respond to your concern, Fred, that statistics are really not good. National statistics are quite bad. Even in countries that have a certain degree of development, we don't know exactly the size and the composition of their GDP because of these time lags being so long. And we estimate that actually about 21% bigger GDP in Africa than what we believe it is, because we don't have up-to-date statistics. If we did, one of the lessons that will emerge from such a reality would be, contemplating how we can do more for new niches of value like ICT that are not fully taken into account. Another one is creative economies, and I can continue the demonstration. But what is important is that when it comes to agriculture, which is what we are discussing mostly today, in many countries today in Africa, about 10 countries, the ICT value is already larger than the agricultural value in GDP.
Wow. Mr. Prime Minister.
Je vous remercie.
Madame a raison de...
Thank you. I think Madam is right to underscore this issue of ITCs. In Côte d'Ivoire, ICTs represent an important part of the GDP, and we have already built 2,000 kilometers of fiber optic, and in 2017 we will have 7,000 kilometers in order to facilitate communication between the different cities. The cities from the outback all the way to Abidjan, and also with countries, neighboring countries, and eventually everywhere in the world. And indeed, the use of mobile phones is developing in most African countries. We have 24 million subscribers, and we need to move ahead. We have installed a village of ICTs in Grand Bassam. We have an institution of higher education that specializes in ICTs, and as Madam is saying, we have suppressed all the custom duties on mobiles, especially for students and for the people. And we have put in place a cyber center here in Côte d'Ivoire. And President Houphouët-Boigny, who was the first president of Côte d'Ivoire, liked to say that if Cote d'Ivoire missed the Industrial Revolution, it should not miss the computer revolution. This was the old man who was already saying this back then. And this is to say that this is crucial. It is a shortcut to development. And we are working in this area in order to move ahead. What is important is that our young people are very much versed into ICTs. They are putting in place software. They are making software that is available internationally. So we have to ensure that we get e-government, e-agriculture, and introduce ICTs in all the domains of our life. We don't have to take the long ways that the developed countries had to take in order to get there. I'm confident that in a decade or two, Africa will change completely.
Thank you. So you're seeing ICT as an opportunity for us to leapfrog in Cote d'Ivoire and the rest of Africa. I'd like to ask one of our guests, Mr. Albase Ouedraogo, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and advisor to the President of the Republic of Burkina Faso. Do you have any questions for the panel? Please address someone on the panel specifically.
Merci beaucoup, Fred.
Thank you, Fred. I would like to say that I'm very happy to be in this forum. It's a very rich forum. It's a forum, as Prime Minister Duncan said, is giving hope to Africa. In other words, we are no longer a continent of despair. We are a continent of prospects, a continent of the future. This having been said, I will talk about something else. In Africa here, we know what needs to be done for development. And what has been said here by the eminent personalities who know everything about development, it is that Africa has all the tools to develop. Now, we are not developing simply because, I believe, in a region such as that of Waemu, you have islands of prosperity and other islands of poverty. And today, 50% of Africans are living with less than $1 a day. And that's not acceptable, and it is sad. And everything that has been said here, be it on infrastructure, on the strengthening of capacities, we are in a global world. And normally, anything that is beneficial for Africa should be beneficial to the rest of the world. But in Africa, the problem is political governance. And that's why I said I wanted to talk about something else. We think that if we had homogeneous areas, harmonized areas, Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa is the engine of growth. But you have countries that do not even have 3% growth, and they belong to the same environment. They are in the same area, and they wanted to create the same market. And I'm saying that if we could help African leaders, politicians, to go beyond their egos and agree to have larger homogeneous areas, for instance, for Waemu, perhaps it's time to move to a federation of West Africa. We have everything to be able to achieve this. The possibilities are here. We have the same language, which is French. We have the same cultures. We have the same currency. And most of our constitutions allow us to have a federation. And don't we think here that if Africa agreed to have larger homogeneous spaces, wouldn't our development be a little more efficient? And once again, I'll say we know the remedies to our difficulties, to come out of all the wars. Let's move now to something more positive. And let's go quickly because we haven't got time. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur le Prime Minister, I'll let you take that question. This time, if you can address it in maybe 2 minutes.
Okay. I would like to be shorter.
Yes, perfect.
Je pense que vous avez raison.
That you're right. To raise this issue, Houphouët-Boigny indicated that Côte d'Ivoire should not be an island of prosperity in a desert of misery. Otherwise, it is the desert that's going to overtake the oasis. President Alassane Ouattara, who's currently the president of WAEMO, is talking about homogeneous areas, complementary homogeneous areas. For instance, with Burkina Faso, we have a friendship treaty, and we meet at a summit once a year with all the Council of Ministers. We have an agreement with Nigeria, and we have a mixed commission, a joint commission, which is headed by the Vice President of Nigeria and the Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire. And we should, all of us, work for the homogeneity of the sub-region and the wider zone of ECOWAS. There is no reason why we shouldn't be able to do this.
Excellent. I wish more politicians were like you, brief, concise answers. I'd now like to invite the CEO of Nestlé, Mr. Paul Bulke, for a special announcement that he would like to make.
What a silence. Also, Fred, thank you. The way you said it created some very much high expectation. But Your Excellency, Prime Minister, honorable ministers, ambassadors, my dear guests, I want to talk actually something that has popped up several times here. I'm going to talk about and make an announcement about youth. Youth. And there's quite a lot of that. 70% of the population in Africa is younger than 30 years. And we know that youth and youth unemployment is a major issue worldwide. It's a serious global social economical challenge. And if you just think the hundreds of millions of young people that are not employed is actually a societal, I would call it, time bomb. This is a big issue. And we have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 8 that actually goes decent work and economical growth. Substantially reduce the proportion of young people not in employment and education or training by 2020. And I think here again the private sector plays a vital role. 9 jobs out of 10 that are created by the private sector. So, and that's why also a few years ago Nestlé started with an initiative, Nestlé Needs Youth Initiative. That was launched in Europe, where we had certain countries with 55% of youth unemployment. We have extended that globally in 2015. So it started in Europe 2013, we extended that into 2015. Globally, Nestlé Needs Youth is an initiative that focuses on 2 lines of actions. The first one is implementing and or strengthening actually existing programs for internship, trainees and apprenticeships, which is quite fundamental. And the second axis is improving the activities linked with readiness to work. It is actually participating in job fairs and clinics and interview guidance, etc., so that people that are young and coming out of school connect with the working force and a job and a career very early on. Well, it's my pleasure now to announce also, as we have done now in Europe, we have done it in Latin America, we have announced it also in North America, we have initiatives in Asia to announce today that we formally want to structure and start this initiative, Nestlé Needs Youth, here in Africa. Nestlé wants to help to prepare 300,000 young people in Africa to enter the world of work. And our commitment is by the end of 2018 to create more than 3,000 apprenticeships and trainingships here in Africa. By 2018, 3,000 apprenticeships. To also provide readiness for work training for more than 300,000 young people that is connected with our web pages, going to some on-site interactions with our company so that we prepare them to better engage and make that step into the workforce. And the third one is building and strengthening strategic partnerships with organizations supporting youth employment. We have, in this sense, created also an alliance for youth in 2014 in Europe. And we have seen 200 companies joining and scaling up this initiative. It is really from the private sector, and Nestlé more specifically, engaging with this dimension that is going to make also this continent, which is the youth, and make sure that they are not lost, but linked up with the labor and with work. So that is what we announced today. That's going to come out today. It's an important initiative. It's Nestlé committing, but also engaging and inviting many, many other companies to do the same. Embrace something that we forget, that is youth. They are our future, hence our communication today. We're proud of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. So Nestlé today announcing that they're making a big investment in the youth of Africa, which, as we all say, is really the greatest resource that we have on the continent. We unfortunately run out of time for this panel. So I would like to thank our panelists, Commissioner Sil, Dr. Carlos Lopez, Prime Minister Duncan, and of course, Mr. Paul Bilker. Thank you very much for your comments, and thanks all of you for questions and dialogue on social media. We will begin shortly the second panel. Thank you.